Hello everyone and welcome to Good Mental Health. I'm Rob Chantler and I'm with you for the next half an hour talking with today Alex Nairn, who's the director of the North West Surrey Samaritans. I'm sure you are aware of the Samaritans' role in helping people who feel suicidal, but there's a lot more to the Samaritans than that, as we will find out tonight. And I'm sure Alex is very well placed to tell us. Good evening, Alex.
And good evening to you. Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in to the show. Tell the listeners a little bit about the Samaritans' ethos to start with. Because it's quite unique, really, isn't it?
Absolutely unique. I mean, I think the Samaritans have been around for 60 years. They were started in 1953 by a guy called the Reverend Chad Vara. Chad heard about a young lady who had committed suicide. And it turned out that she had had her first period and thought it was an illness.
Right.
And killed herself, took her own life. If she'd had someone to talk to, she would have known differently. And so Chad decided that he would set himself up as somebody to talk to and somebody that would listen to people that had problems, which he did. So he was effectively a Samaritan numero uno. He got very busy, as you might imagine, as people saw the opportunity to come and spend time with him and share what was going on in their lives. And he started asking some people to come along and make tea and biscuits and for the people that were waiting to see him. And the strangest thing of all happened, the people that were making the tea and biscuits would talk to the people that had come along, and then they would go away quite happily. They didn't need to see Chad. They had been listened to. They had had a chance to talk to someone that was just giving them a cup of tea. So Chad realised that this was something that needed to be pushed out from him as a single person. And any person, really, who was prepared to listen to another person could be a Samaritan, effectively. And so the Samaritans were born. He didn't come up with the name the Samaritans. It was coined by the media. It just appeared. And we're not a religious organisation, although it started with the Reverend Chad Vara. We're not a religion. But you talk about the ethos. The Samaritans is very much about listening. We're not about solving people's problems. When they phone us or contact us in any of the ways that they will do, they're in a state of mind that we can only have a slight insight into. In the short time that we are with them on the phone or face-to-face or whatever, it would be ridiculous to suggest that we could come up with a solution. So what we'll do, our ethos is about listening. It's about non-judgmental listening. And one of the things that we'll say to callers when they contact us is, we won't tell you what to do. You know, we have got no right. We don't know enough. And actually, if we did tell them what to do, the chances are they've already thought of that. I mean, they're living their life 100% of the time, and we're in it for a minuscule moment, and we're telling them what they should do. They've probably got friends telling them what to do. They've got family telling them what to do. They've got neighbours telling them what to do. They don't need someone else telling them what to do. So when people ring us, we listen. And we listen in a non-judgmental, not telling them what to do. And we are great believers in self-determination. Whatever they've decided to do with their lives, we'll be with them while they're exploring it, while they're thinking about it. If someone phones us up and they're talking about taking their own life, if we were simply to say, that would be a bad thing to do, they'll hang up. They'll simply hang up, because the reason they're talking to us is because they're obviously uncomfortable about what they're deciding, and they want to talk to someone about it. And once again, they don't want someone telling them they're wrong or telling them what to do. They want someone that listens.
How does it differ from the sort of facilitative but more talkative role of the counsellor in a more traditional counselling setting? In counselling, it's very much you are there to get a solution.
You are there, and you will stay with that person as long as you need to get the solution. And there are lots of organisations out there that will offer, whether it be the Citizen Advice Bureau or counsellors, there's a lot of people out there that will offer solutions. We're very, very clear about that we are a listening service. I've had countless phone calls, and so would all Samaritans tell you this, where we have just listened and listened and listened. And at the end of in some calls, 80% of the call, I'll say nothing. I'll just make little reassuring noises, that I'm engaging with the person. And at the end, they'll say, I feel so much better. Thank you. I really enjoyed that conversation. And it was all them.
So it's sort of unburdening themselves, sharing their troubles.
Yeah.
And sometimes do they then come to realise that perhaps, I'd say things aren't as bad as they seem, but they sort of have a different perspective just because they've been able to talk it through?
Yeah. I think I'd be kidding myself if I thought that as a result of a conversation with a single Samaritan at a single moment in time, that every time they would say, I can now see the light and my life has completely changed. The worst that can happen is that they feel that this has been a good time, a good conversation, a worthwhile conversation, something that makes me feel better. The best that can happen is what you've just said, where they realise, hold on, maybe I haven't got this quite right in my head, and maybe I've got another way to look at things moving forward. The best we can do is look after them when they're in contact with us, and what happens next happens next.
How often do you get your callers contacting you later on and sort of saying, oh, thank you for what you did?
Quite a lot, but nothing like as many calls as we get. We get, in our branch, we get 30,000 calls a year. And clearly, most of these people will hear from and never hear from again. We have regular callers, callers that will call us every day, and they need that comfort and someone to talk to. Loneliness is a big issue in our world, and sometimes we're the only person that people will talk to in an entire day. But no, we'd love it if people phoned it up. And we do get occasional letters. And actually, there's something else we also get is donations. People maybe send us money or a cheque or something and say, thank you for what you did. When I spoke to you last week or last month or last year or whatever.
If someone calls you frequently, say because they're lonely and they want to chat, would you then presumably approach your end of the conversation differently? In other words, you would probably be more... It would be a more two-way conversation?
No. I know why you're asking that question, because I suppose the question actually is, do you become friends with the person? And there are people that I as soon as I hear the voice, I know their name, they know my name. We could pass each other in the street, we wouldn't know each other. But it's very much a listening service, and the danger is, you see, that the regular caller, we anticipate what the call is going to be like. We dictate how the call runs, and actually on that particular day they needed something different. So just because every call needs to be taken in its own right, and you shouldn't look back at the call the day before or the month before, or the last time you talked to that person, and just head on as if nothing had happened, because today something may have happened that completely changes the nature of that call. So it has to be the caller's call, not ours.
How do your volunteers deal with callers whose lifestyles or beliefs don't agree with those of the volunteer?
That's a good question. I said a few minutes ago we are non-judgmental, and it's absolutely crucial that we maintain that stance. What the caller is saying to us, first of all, we don't know if it's true. They could be saying something they believe or something they do, and it may not be true. They could be saying it for effect. But they are talking about something that's going on in their life. It's not our life. It's not my life. And I will listen. I will ask questions that explore their feelings. That's what we're about. We're talking about feelings. Whatever you rang us up about, I would say, how is it making you feel? And that's the exploration that we do. And by going down that road, we're not saying... We'd never say to someone, what you're doing is wrong. We'd ask questions that let them explore whether it was right or whether it was wrong for them.
Mm-hmm.
And our beliefs have to stay separate. They absolutely have to. Otherwise the system wouldn't work. If someone phoned us up and needed someone to talk to, and they sensed from us that we didn't like what they were saying, or that we didn't agree with what they were saying, or didn't agree with their beliefs, or believed something completely different, thought they were simply wrong, they'd hang up. And at that moment they had taken... The thing I never forget is that when someone calls us, they probably looked at the phone for 30 to 40 minutes, getting the courage to phone us. And then if they get a bad experience, we probably cut off a lifeline to them forever. So we have to be there in their world for them.
It's probably, as you say, it's probably not something you do on the spur of the moment, is it? You don't just pick up the phone and think, I'm going to call the Samaritans right now. You have to make that decision, don't you, over time.
Some of our regulars do, as I said, obviously.
Yeah.
But you know, if someone's phoning the Samaritans for the first time, you can bet your life they've picked up the phone. We get lots of what we call snaps, which are, we answer the phone and there's nobody there. And they hang up. And we know that that's someone who's trying to get the courage to string the first few words together. And we value these contacts and we stay with them until they hang up. And if they say nothing, that's fine. Or if they say nothing, we'll say, would you like to call back when you feel you can speak? You know, and that happens a lot.
So what other types of thing does the Samaritans deal with apart from what we've discussed already? Because it's quite broad.
It's I mean the kind of things that we'll handle are extremely broad. In fact, the troubles of life, effectively. You know, someone, funnily enough, earlier on today asked me, are there times in the year, are there weeks in the year when you get more calls than and of course Christmas and New Year, and celebrations and royal weddings when everybody appears to be happy, you know, that's when we will get an increase in the amount of calls. But we will respond in the area that we're in now, actually. When the floodings were occurring not so very long ago, it was really interesting to see what happened. During the times of the actual flooding, we didn't get many calls about the floods at all. When people went back to their homes and they were on their own again, because during the flooding it was a big community, we were all in a big hall together, all that kind of stuff. But as soon as they went back to their homes and were standing in sodden front rooms, you know, with ruined furniture and such, that's when we got the calls. And that it's quite nice that people would think of us at a time like this. And of course, and we haven't made this explicit in this conversation yet, these people weren't suicidal, because you do not need to be suicidal. 1 out of 6 people that call us are suicidal.
That's a very small number, probably fewer than people believe.
Absolutely right. And one of the reasons that I love doing talks like this, and thanks for inviting me in, is to get that message across. Because a lot of people, you wouldn't believe how many people start the conversations with us by saying, I'm sorry, I'm not suicidal. Do I have to be suicidal to call you? Right. And they'll checking in. So for everyone that does that, there's probably a couple of dozen don't ring us because they think you've got to be suicidal. You don't.
I can understand that you probably would have more calls at Christmas, because that's when people believe, rightly or wrongly, that other people are having a good time and they're not. But what was interesting, what I was thinking about, was whether or not you had an increase in calls during the recession, when there were lots of people really suffering.
Yeah. I mean, redundancies and losing jobs and financial problems, definitely, without doubt. It's kind of tailed off a bit now, but it's still there. It's still there. As I say, we deal with the problems of life, for everything from a relationship breakdown to loneliness and absolutely being on their own, to anger, abuse, whatever.
Given that you have so many calls then, and you do help people through so many issues, it must be a good reflection on how valuable people find the service or think the service is, because there are so many charities for various relationship problems and debt problems and so on, but they're still ringing you. Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons they ring us, actually, is we are there 24 hours a day, and a lot of them aren't.
Right.
For obvious reasons, they're not. I mean, they're man officers or whatever. But, I mean, as I sit here now, there are 2 Samaritans in our branch right now, and at 11 o'clock tonight, they'll be replaced by another 2. They'll go through the night. So it's our accessibility that makes it. I view us as the 4th emergency service. I don't think the AA is the 4th emergency service at all.
Just out of interest, if you had a Samaritan volunteer engaged in a very long call, listening to a very long problem, or someone just wanted to talk for a long time, how do you work it when that goes over the shift into the next? Is there?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I think from branch to branch that policy might shift.
Right.
With us, we stay with the collar. We stay with the collar.
It'd be very disruptive, wouldn't it? If you didn't?
It would be massively disruptive. If I'd been on the phone to someone for an hour and it was the end of my duty and someone else came in and I said, I'm just going to hand you over to somebody else now, and then they need to start again. Soul destroying. So I think the vast amount of Samaritan branches would stay with the collar and just run over the duty, because that's the important thing.
So if you're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you must have quite a few volunteers then, or volunteers willing to do more than one turn?
Well, there's a bit of both there, actually. There's a bit of both. We need 84 volunteers to turn up every week to fill our rota, and we've got 120.
Oh.
Wow. So we've got a bit of slack, because there are always, it's still difficult to fill, I have to tell you, because of illnesses and holidays at this time of the year that we've just come through, last July, August and a bit of September. We've been really stretched, even with 120. I mean, there was one week we had 25 people on holiday. So we always need volunteers, but I think we'll probably come to that.
What sort of people tend to volunteer to be a Samaritan?
Anybody. Absolutely anybody. People who are genuinely interested in helping other people is the prerequisite, and beyond that. The kind of people who shouldn't, and sometimes do, are those that are there to cure, fix, solve other people's problems and tell them what they should do. Occasionally, people come along with the intention of, I want to be there for people that are down in the luck or whatever, so I can help them solve it. Well, there are other bodies who will do that. But if you're prepared to listen and prepared to allow the caller to make their own decisions, you're a Samaritan. How
do you recruit potential volunteers?
Yes. We have 2, sometimes 3 intakes a year. We advertise in local magazines and we put up banners outside churches. But a lot of them just come from people knowing the Samaritans exist, and they contact our central office, which is in Ewell in Surrey, and they send the application forms to us, and we run them through a process to train them, select them and train them.
So you'd have an interview, presumably, to be selected onto the training.
Yeah,
and
we have. Yeah, it's a kind of 3-stage thing, actually. The first stage is called information. So people would come along, usually to St James's Church in Weybridge. People would come along and we'd tell them about the Samaritans, and we'd tell them some of the things I've just told you now. We're not about fixing people's problems. We're about helping them get in the right frame of mind to solve themselves. And then we'd have an interview process to make sure, a one-to-one interview process to make sure that they were journeying for the right reasons. Sometimes we have to make sure that they're okay in their own lives at the moment, because if somebody's had a traumatic, sometimes people will come to us because they've had something dreadful happen to them and they think they'd now like to come and help other people, and that's great. And a lot of Samaritans around the country used to be callers. They used to call the Samaritans.
I was going to ask you how many of your callers then join you.
Yeah, I don't know the number. I have to say, I haven't got a clue. But a lot of people do, and that's the process.
What sort of support is available if, for example, someone hangs up on you, or you're not sure whether they've taken their own life or what? When things are left hanging in the air? Or doesn't that happen very much?
It does happen. It does happen. A lot of phone calls will finish very abruptly. And that's not always bad. If the phone call was going fine, and sometimes they'll hang up because somebody's come in and they didn't want them to know they were speaking to the Samaritans. Sometimes they'll just, enough, I'm going now. Or sometimes they just think this isn't doing it for me, and they hang up. But what kind of support is available to the volunteers? That's an important part of the structure of the branch. Is the emotional well-being of the volunteers that have dealt with some difficult calls. There's never a volunteer on duty on their own, ever. There's always two. So if someone has a particularly bad call, they can share it with their fellow volunteer. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, by the way, is really important to say at this point, is everything that happens within the Samaritans about individuals is confidential, totally confidential. So I don't go home and talk to my wife about what happens on a call, but I can talk to another Samaritan about what happens on a call, and that's it. And when I leave the branch, it's not talked about at all. So each individual Samaritan has got another Samaritan they can talk to. There's also a leadership structure as well, where there's always a leader responsible for making sure the volunteers and the duty runs okay. So at the end of the duty, a volunteer will call the leader on the phone and will debrief.
Right.
And if necessary, there's deputy directors and myself director. We can provide lots of support along the way. I'm happy to say that it happens, but it's rare that our volunteers really feel desperate because of that support structure.
Just out of interest, how many of the volunteers are mental health professionals as opposed to lay people?
Do you know, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer. If you force me to give an answer, I'd say none.
Right.
I'd say none. There's a few counsellors in there, a few coaches, myself, in fact. But I don't think there's any.
It might be better in a way, I suppose, because if you've been trained traditionally, it might be harder to get your head round Chadvara's model, whereas if you're coming in afresh, it is what it is, isn't it?
That's absolutely correct. We need to be careful that people that are being trained as counsellors don't. As I say, myself as a coach, I work in business as a coach, and the kind of coaching I do is to help someone get a solution. I find when I'm on the Samaritans phone calls, it's quite a release not to have to drive them to a solution, just be there for them in their own world.
Because if you leave someone to find their own way through, as long as they feel supported, they probably will, won't they, most of the time?
Absolutely. I mean, some people obviously don't, and that's the tragedy of life. But 30,000 calls a year, 5 million across the Samaritans movement last year, would indicate that people get value and improve their lives by talking to us.
What happens when you email the Samaritans? Because they had a sort of Email Joe campaign, didn't they?
Right,
which I think they still
do. Still do.
What happens if I sent an email to Joe?
Yeah.
Where would that
go? It could be answered from anywhere, because Joe is obviously a kind of pseudonym just for the Samaritans. And we also take SMSs, by the way.
You can text as well.
We do text as well. So we've got emails and text. And the way they operate, they go into a central pool and could be answered from anywhere. The important thing is they get answered as quickly as possible. So I could go into my branch tonight, open up an email, and it could be somebody in Aberdeen. You'd be amazed how many come from America, by the way. They haven't got a Samaritan's equivalent that runs across America. So we get lots and lots of emails from America. But no, we got email systems in the branches. We open them up comes an email with reply.
If someone emails you, given that you can't really sort of listen to an email, how do you work that? Do you have to ring them back, or is there a way of replying to an email without guiding them too much?
It's the most difficult thing we do by a long way. Because when you speak to someone, you immediately get feedback from how they respond, and you can then adjust and correct. The written word gets read and read and read and read and interpreted and maybe misinterpreted. So every email we write is checked by two Samaritans. So if I wrote an email in the branch, my fellow Samaritan would read it and would tell me, is that what you meant, or whatever. So there's an editing process almost immediately.
Are you able to sort of, without obviously divulging anything, are you able to sort of give me an illustration of the sort of way you would reply that way?
Exactly the same way that we deal with a phone call.
So completely uniquely for every...
I mean, everyone's completely different. I mean, we'd spell out the same things that I spelt out at the beginning about thank you for getting in touch with Samaritans, just to let you know this is entirely confidential. So we want to reassure them right from the outset. They haven't just sent an email to the world, this is not going to appear on Facebook. And then we just take it from there. It's a normal feelings conversation where we'll ask them, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? What else is going on in your life that may make you feel like this? Whatever. Can
they live chat with you?
Not yet. Not yet.
Right.
But trust me, that's coming. That's coming. That's way overdue, actually. Way overdue. We're in the process of putting in a new telephone system that's dominated our life for the last couple of years. The way it works is that if someone is to phone our branch at the moment, if we're busy, it will bounce onto another branch. And it will then bounce around another 5 branches. We're setting up, and sometimes they're all busy. And the worst thing in my world is a caller getting an engaged tone when they've on the Samaritans. We're setting up a new system that will bounce around 30 branches. So they're almost inevitably going to get a reply. And that's crucial, absolutely crucial.
Lastly, you mentioned Facebook. Do you have a social media presence as well? Have you embraced that?
We don't. We don't.
Right.
I think it's quite dangerous for branches to have social media. Some do, actually, I have to tell you. A few do. But you need to be really careful how you use it because it is such a confidential, sensitive thing. I think there's a Facebook presence for the central general office kind of thing, for the Samaritans as a whole. But individual branches, no.
So just to sort of recap then, people can call you for any reason at all, any support, whatever the problem, depression, suicide, loneliness, emptiness, it completely doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all. If they want someone to talk to, don't decide that maybe your issue isn't big enough or not the sort of thing we want to talk to. If you want someone to talk to, we want to talk to you.
Would you ever refer them on if you felt out of your depth, or is that not going to happen because of the approach that you take?
Well, actually, it's not about being out of our depth, actually. It's about that we have something called signposting. And signposting is where, after we've talked to someone for some time, we may gently suggest that, do you think you would benefit from talking to a Childline, shall we say? If they say yes, we'll help them with a number and all that kind of stuff. If they say no, that's fine. We need to be really careful with signposting, because if you signpost too early, I've heard someone say, have I phoned the wrong place? Shouldn't I have phoned you? And that's clearly not what we want them to be thinking. If someone phones up to say they're going to commit suicide, we will ask them, do you want us to call an ambulance? Or do you want to give us your number? But if you do, we will call an ambulance. But it's always their choice.
Right.
It's always their choice. And if they then hang up on us, that's the end of the call. It's another call, finished.
Okay. So they really are completely anonymous then?
Completely anonymous. And as I say, we don't even know where they are. I mean, they quite literally could be in Aberdeen.
If people wanted to give you money rather than their time to help fund the work, what was the best way to do that?
A cheque to North West Surrey Samaritans.
Right.
And I can't stress North West Surrey because each branch is independent, you see. So we have to say North West Surrey Samaritans in order for it to get into our bank account. But that would be lovely if someone wanted to do it.
And that's still Ledger Drive, is it?
Yes, it is. Ledger Drive in Addleston. Absolutely.
Would you like to give any details about how people can get in touch or anything like that?
Well, I'd certainly, I mean, the things, something you mentioned much earlier on is about volunteering, and we always need volunteers because people, life circumstances change and they leave and they move away and they maybe join another branch, which often happens actually, because there is 201 of us. So I would love people to contact us to find out a bit more about being a Samaritan and decide whether it is for them or not. And there are not just listening volunteer roles to be done. We've got need for support. Would you believe we need a gardener? At the moment, we could do with it. We haven't got much for garden, by the way, but what we've got is a mess, and we'd really like someone to come along, once a week, once a fortnight, once a month, whatever, and tidy it up. And if they got in touch with us to do that, we'd love to talk. But if they genuinely want to be a listening volunteer and go through the process of selection and interviewing and training. We'd love to do that as well. And as you say, the address is Ledger Drive in Addleston.
How long does it take, actually, from the time of applying to the time when you would potentially be taking calls?
It depends. Oh, right, okay. It depends on the time of year, of course, because we've got 2 intakes in the year. So we've got a spring one and we've got an autumn one. But if you came in just as one of these was about to start, it's fairly quick. If the training takes 6 weeks, and there's 8 modules over 6 weeks, which is about 30 hours, it's a big commitment. But if you think about it, you don't want to put people on the telephones for their sake or for the caller's sake if they're not trained. So you've got 6 weeks of training, then you will get a mentor who will sit with you when you do your first couple of duties, and then there is another refresher training that you then do for another 4 weeks. So the training is very consistent, very professional, very high standard, and it works.
Is there a minimum commitment that you'd ask for from a listener?
Certainly is.
Right,
certainly
what is that?
And that's crucial. That's absolutely crucial, because we have to keep the branch open. And to do that, we like people to aim to do 1 duty per week. And the duty is about 3.5 hours. But actually, the truth is it's half a day. Because by the time you get there and you drive away back home, it's a half a day commitment. But it's a very satisfying half day.
And you don't have to do night shifts?
You do.
You do?
If you're over 70, you don't, actually.
Right, okay.
So I'm afraid you would have to. I'm sorry about that.
So, yes. So you all sort of do your shift, but you share all the times across the... how it works?
You have to do... the way, once again, branches operate differently. Some branches allocate the same duty to the same person every week. We have a much more random approach here. What can you do? Book a duty and let's... it presents us with problems, but it allows people to fit us in with their lives, which is really, really important. But 1 duty a month has to be a night duty. That's our busiest duties, as you can imagine. Lovely.
Well, I hope we've given you a bit more of an insight into the work of the Samaritans through the programme. It's been very informative, and I've learned a lot myself. So I'd like to say thank you very much, Alex, for coming in and talking to us. And do you have presumably you have an email address or something if people want to drop you a line?
I would just say go onto our North West Surrey Samaritans website.
Right,
and you'll get the telephone numbers, the email addresses, SMS, all that kind of stuff.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And thank you all for listening to the programme. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. And I'm sure if you want to get in touch with us here at Radio Wey, we can remind you of any details that you might have missed. And hopefully we will talk again very soon.